On April 20th, 2010, the world watched in horror as the Deepwater Horizon, a massive offshore oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico, erupted into flames, triggering one of the worst environmental disasters in history. What began as a routine drilling operation turned into a catastrophic explosion that claimed 11 lives, injured dozens, and unleashed millions of barrels of oil into the Gulf of America, devastating ecosystems and livelihoods for years to come. In this video, we'll unravel the gripping story of the Deepwater Horizon disaster, how it happened, who was held accountable, and the lasting lessons it left behind. Get ready to dive into a tale of human error, corporate missteps, and nature's unforgiving response. It was an ordinary evening on the Deepwater Horizon. The crew was wrapping up routine operations, confident in the stability of their massive rig. The Gulf of America stretched endlessly in every direction, calm and unsuspecting. Everything seemed normal, until it wasn't. In a matter of minutes, peace turned to chaos. A sudden surge of methane gas shot up the drill pipe, triggering an uncontrollable chain reaction. Explosions erupted, tearing through steel and machinery, lighting up the night sky with flames that could be seen for miles. 11 lives were lost instantly, and the rig was now a disaster zone. But what really happened that night? Was this a freak accident or a ticking time bomb that was always destined to explode? What if this wasn't just a failure of equipment but the result of years of negligence and greed? And the most chilling question, could this disaster have been avoided? Or was it all part of a bigger, darker plan to save money at any cost? But before we dive in, some of the details in this story are disturbing and may not be suitable for all audiences, so viewer discretion is strongly advised. As always, remember to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on post notifications to stay up to date with the channel. Alright, let's dive into the video.
Good afternoon. We begin with breaking news.
An explosion on an oil drilling platform
in the Gulf of Mexico.
This is a battle we're waging against an oil spill that is assaulting our shores and our citizens.
The Deepwater Horizon was a semi-submersible mobile drilling rig that could operate in waters up to 10,000 feet deep, an impressive feat of engineering at the time. Built by the South Korean company Hyundai Heavy Industries and owned by Transocean, the rig was chartered to BP from March 2008 until September 2013. It was designed to drill for oil in some of the most remote and challenging parts of the Gulf of America, a region known for its deep waters and rich oil reserves. The rig had been operating in the Macondo prospect, situated in the Mississippi Canyon Block 253, drilling a deep exploratory well nearly 18,360 feet below sea level, in water about 5,100 feet deep. On the evening of April 20th, 2010, the situation on the Deepwater Horizon seemed routine. The crew was finishing up a normal day of operations, with the rig still floating steadily on the surface. Little did they know disaster was about to strike. At approximately 7:45 p.m., the peaceful operations turned into a deadly nightmare. A surge of high-pressure methane gas from the Macondo well made its way into the marine riser, the pipe that connects the rig to the wellhead deep beneath the ocean floor. As the gas expanded, it rapidly rose into the rig, igniting a catastrophic explosion. The force of the blast caused the rig to catch fire, and the crew was thrown into a desperate fight for survival. The explosion was immediate and violent. 11 workers were tragically killed, their lives claimed in an instant. Despite an extensive 3-day search by the U.S. Coast Guard, the bodies of the missing workers were never recovered. The rig itself, heavily damaged by the blast, was left sinking into the Gulf of America, where it eventually plunged to the ocean floor on April 22, 2010. But what happened afterwards was even scarier. The explosion unleashed a massive oil spill, which was first detected on the afternoon of April 22, 2010, as a large slick began to spread across the surface of the Gulf of America. BP initially estimated the leak to be releasing between 1,000 and 5,000 barrels of oil per day, but the real figures were far worse. After further analysis, the flow rate technical group estimated that the flow rate, was a staggering 62,000 barrels of oil per day, much higher than BP's estimates. The oil continued to spill for 87 days, making it the largest accidental oil spill in history. BP's initial efforts to control the spill were ineffective, and the oil poured into the Gulf at a terrifying rate. Over the course of the spill, an estimated 4.9 million barrels of oil were released into the ocean, causing massive ecological and environmental damage. The oil slick affected over 70,000 square miles of ocean, an area roughly the size of Oklahoma. As the oil spread, it reached the shores of Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida, devastating coastlines and ecosystems along the Gulf. The environmental impact was catastrophic. Beaches became coated in thick black oil, killing marine life and disrupting local industries. The spill affected more than 1,000 miles of coastline, including marshlands, estuaries, and vital habitats for wildlife. By the end of June 2010, the oil had reached the shores of Louisiana, Florida, and Alabama. In some areas, the oil turned beaches into sticky, tar-covered wastelands, and wildlife, from fish to birds, were found covered in oil, struggling to survive. The Gulf Coast tourism industry, a vital source of income for the region, took a major hit as the once pristine beaches became tainted by the oil. Despite efforts to clean up the spill, the oil continued to wash ashore for months. By September 2010, oil had reached the shores of Texas, and in 2011, the oil contamination was still affecting 491 miles of coastline. Oil slicks, balls of tar, and residue from the spill were visible across the region. Even as late as 2013, balls of tar were still washing up on beaches, and oil was still present in the deep ocean, threatening marine life for years to come. BP tried several methods to stop the horrific oil spill that followed the explosion of the Deepwater Horizon drilling rig in April 2010. These attempts were critical, but most were unsuccessful in the beginning, leading to an ongoing disaster that stretched for months and had a far-reaching environmental impact. BP's first attempt to halt the leak was with remotely operated underwater vehicles. These machines were supposed to close the blowout preventer valves on the wellhead, sealing off the leak. This was a technique that had worked in shallower waters before, but in the case of the Macondo well, it was doomed from the start. The pressure from the well was too high, and the cold temperatures at that depth caused gas to form methane hydrate crystals, which blocked the opening at the top of the containment dome. Essentially, the crystals acted like a clogged drain, preventing any oil from being contained. BP tried a method known as the top kill. The idea was to pump heavy drilling fluids into the blowout preventer, hoping the added weight would slow the oil flow. The hope was that this would buy them enough time to seal the well permanently with cement. Unfortunately, the top kill method failed as well. The oil kept leaking, and BP was forced to come up with other ways to stop the flow before the disaster got even worse. After these initial setbacks, BP attempted a more complex approach by using a riser insertion tube. This device was designed to funnel the oil directly into the insertion tube, bypassing the original leak. This technique was slightly more successful. BP inserted the tube into the pipe and used a stopper-like washer at the end of the riser to divert the flow into the new tube. The oil collected in the tube was flared and stored on the drillship Discoverer Enterprise, where it was burned off. Between the start of this effort and early June 2010, BP managed to collect around 924,000 gallons or 22,000 barrels of oil. While it was a small victory, the true scale of the disaster had already begun to sink in. By June 3, 2010, BP had removed the damaged riser and put a cap on the well to stop the flow of oil. This was another step toward controlling the spill, but the operation was far from perfect. By mid-June, a second containment system was in place connected directly to the blowout preventer. This allowed BP to capture even more oil, but government estimates showed that less than half of the oil leaking from the well was being contained. The environmental damage continued to mount, and the situation remained dire. As the months dragged on, BP made more efforts to contain the leak. On July 10, 2010, They replaced the original containment cap with a new one called Top Hat Number 10. This was supposed to be a better fit, providing a more secure seal. They also tried injecting mud and cement into the well to reduce pressure, but those efforts ultimately failed. The sheer force of the oil and gas spewing from the well seemed unstoppable. However, as the situation became increasingly desperate, BP turned to another plan: drilling the relief wells. These wells were designed to relieve the pressure inside the Macondo well, allowing the flow of oil to be contained. The first relief well started drilling on May 2, 2010, and a second relief well began drilling on May 16, 2010. It took several months before the first relief well reached the leak in early August. Once it did, BP pumped in drilling mud and oil, slowly reducing the pressure and stabilizing the well. By August 4, 2010, the well was in a static condition, meaning it was no longer leaking oil. On September 19, 2010, after months of painstaking effort, the well was finally declared effectively dead by National Incident Commander Thad Allen. At that point, the well no longer posed a threat to the Gulf of America, and BP's emergency response efforts were deemed a success, at least for the moment. However, the story didn't end there. Even after the well was supposedly sealed, the Gulf continued to suffer from the after-effects of the spill. The disastrous event wasn't just about the immediate destruction caused by the explosion and the oil spewing into the water. It had long-lasting consequences that lingered for years. Despite BP's best efforts, oil slicks continued to appear on the surface of the water, with significant reports in March 2011, August 2011, and even as late as January 2013. The oil that was dispersed in the ocean was still having an impact on the environment, and BP continued to face scrutiny. In 2012, BP found another leak near the site of the original spill. This time, it came from a failed containment dome, which was abandoned about 1,500 feet from the main well. They quickly worked to plug this new leak. But by this point, the damage to the Gulf was clear. The environment, wildlife, and local economies were in shambles, and there was no quick fix. BP's continued work to stop the leaks was a constant reminder of the scale of the catastrophe. The U.S. Coast Guard also conducted regular surveys to assess the situation. By December 2012, they had found no oil coming from the wreckage, but the mystery remained. Where was the oil coming from? The most likely explanation was that residual oil was still leaking from the wreckage, or it was formation oil escaping from the subsurface. Formation oil is oil trapped below the Earth's surface that can escape through faults or fractures in the rock. If that were the case, the oil might continue to leak indefinitely, potentially causing even more damage to the environment. The uncertainty only added to the ongoing anxiety around the spill. By January 2013, BP and the U.S. Coast Guard were still investigating the cause of the oil slicks, but it became clear that the oil was likely coming from residual leaks within the wreckage. Scientists found that the oil was chemically identical to the oil from the Macondo well, but the slicks were smaller than the original spill. Fortunately, they weren't large enough to pose an immediate threat to wildlife, but it was a sobering reminder that the Macondo well's troubles were far from over. The key to tackling the monumental BP Deepwater Horizon spill relied on three key strategies: containment, dispersal, and removal. These efforts were aimed at limiting the impact of the disaster, cleaning up the oil, and minimizing the ecological and economic damage. The operation was one of the largest and most complex environmental cleanups ever attempted. As the oil spill unfolded in the Gulf of America in 2010, more than 47,000 people and 7,000 vessels were mobilized to address the crisis. By October 2012, federal response efforts had accumulated $850 million in costs, largely reimbursed by BP. Even as late as January 2013, nearly 1,000 personnel were still on the ground, and BP had already spent over $14 billion on cleanup efforts. However, despite these massive efforts, the spill's environmental impact remained significant. Estimates on the scale of the spill vary, but a report suggested that around 4.9 million barrels of oil were released from the well, with approximately 4.1 million barrels making their way into the Gulf. A significant portion of the cleanup effort revolved around public participation. In May 2010, local volunteers, along with boat captains, were enlisted to help clean up beaches and prevent the spread of the oil. This initiative saw the creation of the Vessels of Opportunity program, where local boat captains could offer their vessels for oil cleanup purposes. Unfortunately, only about a third of the registered boats participated, frustrating many locals and environmental advocates who felt BP's response was too slow. This led to the formation of the Florida Key Environmental Coalition, which gained influence and pushed for greater accountability and more effective action. Containment efforts were crucial in managing the immediate spread of the oil. A network of oil containment booms was deployed, stretching over 4,200,000 feet, or 1,300 kilometers across the Gulf. These booms were designed to corral the oil and protect sensitive ecological zones such as marshes, mangroves, and shrimp habitats. The booms, which varied in size from 18 to 48 inches in height, proved effective in calm waters, but were much less so when faced with larger waves, which allowed oil to escape either above or below the barrier. Despite their limited success, over 13,300,000 feet, or 4,100 kilometers, of booms were put into place. Critics of the booms argued that they were ineffective, particularly in rougher waters, and often washed up on the shore carrying the oil with them. The oil's eventual breakdown in the Gulf relied heavily on both human intervention and natural processes. Oil-eating microbes in the Gulf waters began consuming parts of the oil, aided by the dispersants. However, there was considerable debate about the effectiveness of these microbes. Some studies showed that they played a role in breaking down both the oil and the natural gas released during the spill, while others suggested that the microbes primarily consumed the natural gas, leaving the oil largely untouched. Researchers like David L. Valentine from the University of California, Santa Barbara, argued that the microbes' ability to break down the spilled oil had been overstated. On the other hand, biogeochemist Chris Reddy emphasized that these microorganisms were critical in preventing the spill from being far worse. To expedite the microbial breakdown of oil, BP and its partners also experimented with genetically modified bacteria. One such strain, Alcanivorax borcumensis, was introduced into the waters in an effort to speed up the digestion process. While the idea of enhancing oil-eating microbes was intriguing, it also raised questions about the long-term consequences of introducing genetically modified organisms into the ecosystem. In terms of actual physical removal of the oil, several methods were employed. The primary techniques used were combustion, offshore filtration, and direct collection for later processing. Throughout the spill, there were numerous controlled in-situ fires which involved burning oil on the surface of the water. These fires burned millions of barrels of oil but also released toxins, including dioxins, which are known to be cancer-causing. Despite the potential health risks, these controlled burns helped mitigate the immediate danger of the oil spreading further. Offshore filtration efforts were also employed, with over 2,000 skimmers deployed in the Gulf. These skimmers, designed to collect oil from the surface of the water, faced challenges due to the dispersed nature of the oil caused by the dispersants. Many skimmers failed to meet EPA regulations on the amount of oil they left behind, which further hindered the cleanup process. Nonetheless, over time, BP and its partners ramped up efforts to improve skimmer performance, ordering machines capable of processing up to 2,000 barrels of oil per day. Onshore, the cleanup effort focused on two primary types of coastal areas: sandy beaches and marshes. On beaches, workers sifted through sand to remove tar balls and tar mats, often using mechanical devices or manually removing the oil. Marshes, which are far more delicate, required different methods, such as vacuuming and low-pressure flushing, as well as bioremediation techniques designed to restore the natural balance of the ecosystem. It was not until April 15, 2014, that BP announced a significant milestone in the aftermath of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. The company declared that cleanup operations along the coast were largely complete. However, this was not the end of the recovery process. Even though the immediate cleanup efforts had concluded, the United States Coast Guard continued their work using physical barriers, such as floating booms, to contain the oil. These booms were essential in preventing the further spread of oil into unspoiled areas. Skimmer boats were deployed to remove much of the visible oil, while workers on the ground used sorbents, materials that acted like sponges, to absorb any lingering oil patches. Despite these efforts, the process of fully eradicating the oil from the environment remained far from complete. The oil had already seeped deep into the ecosystem, and several alternative methods were needed to break down and disperse it. One such method involved the use of chemical dispersants, which were intended to hasten the oil's natural degradation process. BP deployed approximately 1.4 million gallons, or 5.3 million liters, of these dispersants to break up the oil into smaller particles. These smaller droplets would then be more easily consumed by naturally occurring microorganisms in the ocean, helping to prevent the oil from causing further damage to the marine habitats that lay beneath the surface. Before we continue on, if you are enjoying the story so far, please hit that like button, and if you don't like it, let me know down in the comments. Your support truly means everything. Alright, back to the video. However, no amount of cleanup could reverse the damage done to marine life. In the immediate aftermath of the spill, images of wildlife covered in thick layers of oil flooded the media. Thousands of animals were visibly harmed and many died as a result of the oil contaminating their natural habitats. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, in collaboration with the Smithsonian's National Zoological Park, worked tirelessly to rescue and rehabilitate affected animals. Despite their best efforts, many animals, unfortunately, perished in the disaster. These images highlighted the devastating consequences of such a massive environmental catastrophe. The environmental consequences of the Deepwater Horizon spill were vast and severe. The spill affected over 8,000 species in the Gulf of America, including more than 1,200 fish species, hundreds of birds, and thousands of mollusks and crustaceans. The spill waters contained extremely high levels of polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, PAHs, which are toxic chemicals often associated with oil spills. These chemicals can have carcinogenic effects on both humans and marine life, making the oil spill particularly dangerous for the Gulf's diverse ecosystems. In the months that followed, the spill area was found to have 40 times more PAHs than normal, with the most significant concentrations located near the Louisiana coast. These toxic compounds not only harmed marine life, but also had a devastating effect on microbes that would typically help to degrade the oil, thus further reducing the oxygen levels in the affected waters. The presence of methane, a potent greenhouse gas in the oil, was another concerning issue. The oil released from the Deepwater Horizon rig contained an unusually high concentration of methane, around 40% by weight, compared to the 5% typically found in other oil deposits. Methane is known to deplete oxygen levels in water, creating so-called dead zones, where marine life cannot survive. This, combined with the toxic effects of PAHs, made the Gulf waters even more dangerous for the local wildlife. The spill's long-term impact on the ecosystem was profound, with many species suffering from organ damage, reduced fertility, and deformities in their offspring. One of the more chilling findings from studies conducted after the spill was the impact of the toxins on fish, such as bluefin tuna. A study funded by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, Stanford University, and the Monterey Bay Aquarium found that the oil from the spill caused irregular heartbeats in bluefin tuna, which could lead to cardiac arrest. This finding was particularly concerning because the area affected by the spill was known for being one of the most productive ocean ecosystems in the world. Even at low concentrations, the oil's toxicity was having a devastating impact on various marine species, potentially leading to a catastrophic collapse of the food chain. Other studies have shown similar effects on other marine life. A peer-reviewed study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences found that fish species, such as amberjack, exposed to the oil from the spill developed deformities in their hearts and other organs. These deformities were predicted to be fatal, or at the very least, life-shortening. Scientists suggested that the same types of damage could be occurring in humans, as the hearts of developing humans are similar to those of fish in many ways. BP responded by downplaying the significance of the study, arguing that the concentrations of oil in the experiment were not representative of those seen in the Gulf. However, this claim was contradicted by the findings, leaving many to question the full extent of the spill's impact on marine and human life alike. One of the more innovative and controversial methods used during the cleanup process was the underwater application of oil dispersants. Typically, dispersants are used to break up oil on the surface of the water. But, in this case, large quantities of the dispersant Corexit were applied directly to the underwater oil. This was an unprecedented move, as dispersants had only been used on the surface before. The goal was to make the oil more biodegradable by encouraging natural microbes to break it down. However, this process also caused the oil to be suspended in the water column rather than rising to the surface. This created a mixture of oil and dispersant that permeated the food chain, reaching even the tiniest zooplankton. These microscopic organisms serve as the foundation of the marine food web, meaning that the oil and dispersants were slowly poisoning the entire ecosystem. The damage caused by the oil and dispersants was widespread. Evidence of the contamination was found in places as far away as Minnesota, where migratory birds were found to have petroleum compounds and Corexit in their bodies. In the Gulf itself, scientists observed a significant increase in mutated fish, including shrimp, that were found to be lacking eyes and other deformities. By 2012, reports from commercial fishermen noted that 50% of the shrimp in the region were missing their eyes or eye sockets. Fishermen also began to see fish with open sores and lesions, a stark contrast to the healthy fish populations that had once thrived in the Gulf. Prior to the spill, only 0.1% of fish had lesions, but by 2012, that number had jumped to 20%, and in some areas, as high as 50%. The widespread occurrence of these lesions signaled a major disruption in the local marine ecosystem. The spill also had a profound impact on coastal bird populations. Researchers estimated that over 1 million birds perished as a direct result of the spill. In the years following the disaster, scientists continued to observe unusually high numbers of stranded dolphins, sea turtles, and other marine mammals. The death rates among these species were far higher than normal, and many of the animals that survived were severely injured or sick. In the first birthing season after the spill, dead baby dolphins washed up along the shorelines of Mississippi and Alabama at a rate 10 times higher than the normal average. A NOAA study later confirmed that nearly half of the bottlenose dolphins tested in Barataria Bay, one of the most heavily oiled areas, were in guarded or worse health, and many were not expected to survive. These findings further underscored the tragic long-term consequences of the spill on the Gulf's marine life. As the years passed, the environmental devastation caused by the Deepwater Horizon oil spill continued to unfold. In 2013, researchers reported that tar balls, clumps of oil that had hardened into small, round lumps, continued to wash up along the Gulf Coast. This was a troubling sign that the oil was still present in the region, despite efforts to clean up the coast. These balls of tar, along with oil sheens in the marshes and signs of severe coastal erosion, painted a grim picture of the ongoing recovery process. Former NASA physicist Bonnie Shoemaker, who had conducted multiple overflights of the spill area, noted a disturbing dearth of marine life in the vicinity of the well. This phenomenon suggested that the ecosystem was still reeling from the effects of the spill, and that full recovery could take decades. Even the seafloor was not spared from the long-term effects of the oil. Researchers discovered that oil deposits on the ocean floor were not degrading as expected. Instead, they formed clumps that sank to the bottom, creating a phenomenon known as a dirty blizzard. These oily particles suspended in the water column eventually settled on the seafloor, creating an underwater rain of oil that could have long-lasting consequences for marine life. In addition to the ongoing environmental damage, the health effects of the spill on humans were also significant. Reports of spill exposure cases began to surface in the summer of 2010, with workers involved in the cleanup efforts experiencing symptoms of chemical exposure. Environmental scientist Wilma Subra found alarming levels of volatile organic compounds, VOCs, in the blood of cleanup workers and local residents. These compounds are toxic and can cause a range of health issues, including respiratory problems and long-term organ damage. The presence of these chemicals in the blood was a clear sign that the spill's effects extended far beyond the immediate environment. Though BP eventually committed to a major environmental restoration effort, the long-term damage caused by the oil spill was undeniable. Years later, the Gulf of Mexico remains a far cry from its previous health, and full recovery may take generations. Despite BP's commitment to restoration, the full extent of the harm caused by the Deepwater Horizon spill remains unclear, and the lessons learned from this tragedy will continue to shape the world's response to future environmental disasters. BP faced huge legal trouble after the Deepwater Horizon spill, with lawsuits pouring in from individuals, businesses, and the government looking for compensation. In 2012, BP settled with the U.S. government, agreeing to pay $4.5 billion in criminal fines. This was just part of a long legal fight where BP had to pay billions to businesses and people in the region. However, many felt that the settlement didn't even come close to covering the massive environmental damage caused by the spill. BP's legal team worked around the clock to handle all the lawsuits and claims. They eventually reached a $20 billion settlement with the U.S. government and affected states. But even with that, many felt the money didn't fully cover the long-term environmental damage. The funds went towards helping recover the Gulf Coast, but local communities still struggled. Industries like tourism, fishing, and agriculture took huge hits, and cleanup efforts dragged on for years, with tar balls washing up on beaches well into 2013, showing the lasting impact of the disaster. Even after those huge settlements, BP's legal battles weren't over. They faced lawsuits from individual states, local governments, and environmental groups. Louisiana, for example, received money from BP for testing the health of its ecosystem. In 2019, reports showed that the spill's effects on fish populations were still not fully understood, and groups continued pushing for more testing and compensation. BP's efforts to address these concerns were met with doubt, as many felt the company wasn't being open about how bad the damage really was. The spill was a wake-up call, not just for BP but for the entire oil industry. It highlighted the need for stricter rules around offshore drilling and the use of dispersants, as well as the need for companies to be held accountable for environmental harm. While the settlements were massive, many saw them as a way for BP to move on without truly fixing the long-term costs of the disaster. Although BP did a lot to clean up the spill, the long-term impact still affects the Gulf of Mexico ecosystem and the people who depend on it. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, then check out these videos on the screen now. If you have a topic suggestion, please send it to the email in the description. And as always, remember to like, comment, share the video, and subscribe to our channel. And remember, the only thing scarier than this story is missing out on our next video.